My name is Stanley Heller. I'm with the Middle East Crisis Committee. We started that in 1982, and our website and our TV show is The Struggle. I want to talk about the right to return. You know, you've heard the Great Return March. What's the return about? Now, in 48, Israel declared independence, but in 47, the Zionist forces were already driving Palestinians away from their homes, forcibly, with massacres and threats. And this continued on. Huge numbers, 800,000 people forced to leave their homes. We have a term for that now, ethnic cleansing. The United Nations said these people had a right to return to their homes. It happens after wars. The war is over, the armistice happens, people go back to their homes. We were never allowed that. In 67, there were thousands more when Israel took over the West Bank and Gaza. There were more refugees. And there are millions all around the world. So the right to return, to go back to their towns, their homes, their cities, is something that has never been abandoned by Palestinians. And in a lot of their art, they'll have a picture of a key, because many took the keys to their homes. And they're quite serious about this. Now, back in 2000, there was a professor here at Yale. He was a geneticist, and he taught us about this right to return. And so there was an organization called Al-Auda, the Return. And a number of us said, why don't we get some Jews to support this idea? Because among the Jewish community, it was considered, the worst idea in the world. And so we came up with that, and this was our first banner. And we were actually too nervous to say right to return, since we support the rights of Palestinian refugees. And if you went to our literature, then you found out more. But we were a little nervous about that. But we continued with that effort. In a couple of years, we had 500 Jews from around the world supporting it, and we were saying it right out front, the Palestinian right to return. Now, 3 years ago, Jewish Voice for Peace had to consider that idea. And at their Baltimore convention, to my absolute delight, when the proposal was made, every single person, there were 700 people standing up for Palestinian right to return in that auditorium in Baltimore. And this is something that we have to understand. These people want to go back, and it's actually geographically possible. Most of those towns are abandoned. They're kept as nature reserve or quaint places with ruins. No explanation given. It is possible, and it is right, and it is necessary for people to understand the Palestinians need to be able to be given that option of going back. Second thing is about protests. Since the 30th, we've had a couple of protests in front of congressmen's offices. The first was at DeLauro's office, and her office is down Elm Street, just a couple blocks away from here. We picked her because of a photo. There was a photo with 10 or 15 Democratic congressmen who had gone to Israel, and they stood with a war criminal. They stood with Netanyahu, who has been responsible for incredible massacres over the years. They stood with a racist, and I don't mean about Palestinians, I mean about Africans and blacks. There's something, I forget the number now, something like 37,000 Africans who made their way to Israel for one reason or another, who he is adamant about expelling. And they make them live in South Tel Aviv. They give them no social services. They don't allow them to work. You can imagine what conditions are like. There is some crime, and of course, the incredible racist rabble is allowed to run free. There's actually lynchings in Israel of blacks. Netanyahu stands for that. And Rosa DeLauro and Jim Hines stood with Netanyahu. This was just a couple days before March 30th. So we went down to DeLauro's office, and we picketed there. We went to Larson's office up in Hartford. We asked for a statement. As far as I know, neither have said a single word up until this point. The pressure should still be put on these people. It is disgraceful for their silence on this. A third thing, a couple signs, I guess I don't see them now, somebody put them down, about the Rugers. They're somewhere here. Could somebody bring that up just to, so we all have the spelling of Ruger. Connecticut has a special responsibility because of the guns. Back in December, after Trump made his announcement about Jerusalem, there were, of course, demonstrations in Gaza, and a man named Al-Thuraya was shot dead by a sniper. Why was he in particular important? Well, he had no legs. He had been injured in a prior bombing in Gaza, and he still worked for a living and would go out to all the protests. He had no legs. He would sometimes stand on stumps, more often be in a wheelchair, and he was shot in the head by a sniper. And at that point there was a mass killing, one of the many in the United States, in Texas, at a church. A whole bunch of people got killed. And some people from New York, they're called Gays Against Guns, went to Fairfield, Connecticut, 30, 40 miles from here, to a section called Southport, because Sturm Ruger is in that area. It's their corporate headquarters, and I believe they have production facilities there. Ruger, it turns out, is the best-selling rifle in the United States. It's not as famous as Smith & Wesson or Colt, but they sell weapons. And so these people are angry about that. And then it occurred to me, maybe Ruger rifles are being used other places. And you go to the Ruger site, you don't see anything, but there are gun fan sites. You know, people who are in trance with guns, and they talk about Ruger being in Israel. So I wrote to the CEO of Ruger 3 times, by the web, by the snail mail, and he has not made any reply. So I can assume that these fan sites are right, that the Ruger rifles are over there, that some, or maybe even all, the 46 people who were killed by guns made in this state. And it's something we have to deal with, and we certainly should demand Ruger stop selling these rifles, and we should go down to Ruger and make our voice known. Last point, I know the numbers of people who deal with the Palestine issue are small here at Yale, but things start out small, but they sometimes can get very big. Now, in the 80s, there was an anti-apartheid movement here at Yale. It wasn't about Palestine, but it was about South Africa. And over in, what do they call that plaza over there? Beinecke Plaza. It was actually renamed Alan Bosek Plaza after one of the activists in South Africa. There were shanties built. A number of us built shanties to show what it was like for South African blacks to live at that time. And we got a call 3 in the morning, the cops are going to take it down. And so we went, we all got arrested, they took it down. We got bailed out, and when we came back, there was 1,000 people there. There was 1,000 Yale students there who had heard the word. So you got to be creative, think of things that will touch people's sympathies, their understandings, and build on this thing, because it's an urgent message. It's an urgent thing, and I tremble to feel, think about what will happen in a couple of weeks when this comes to a climax. Because even in Haaretz, the supposed liberal Israel newspaper, they have a military correspondent who's a settler who's talking about, terrible things that the Arabs are going to do on May 15th. So you can imagine what the Israelis are preparing. So stick together, keep these activities. Free Palestine!